Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your host, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense.
Welcome back into the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Gambino, and I am here with Dr. Joe on the move, LaVacca. Welcome back.
Happy
in,
to be
my
here.
friend. Welcome
Lots
back
of big
in.
things today.
Yes.
We'll talk about the move. I put on the influencer light. So for those of people watching on YouTube, you'll actually see the right side of my face now in this episode. So that's pretty exciting. I was realizing like it looked like I was wearing an eye patch most of the time in all these YouTube videos and Instagram clips, especially on the right side. I don't know why, but I do know why. This apartment has no natural light. But like we were saying before, me and Avery will be moving in about 3 weeks' time to a bigger apartment, much more natural light, freshly painted, freshly renovated. So white, clean backgrounds. It's going to look really good, man. That YouTube quality already with this light and the natural light that I'm going to have to match yours now.
That's
straight up.
The 18 subscribers are going to really enjoy it.
They're going to like it. You know, like I told you, I mean, that's a 400% increase from where we were when we started this thing.
That's right.
You know, little increments.
I love it, man. Well, as everyone should, know by now, hopefully, unless you're new tuning in, you can find us easily on Instagram. That's where Joe and I are most active, at Joe Gambino DPT for myself, at Strength and Motion _PT for LaVacca over there. This podcast is also on Instagram, Beyond Pain Podcast. And you can find us on YouTube as well, as we alluded to, Cups of Joe _PT over there. All right, Joey, what we talking about today?
Well, I think we're going to continue our conversation with a little more context on warming up and what you do or I do, maybe at a personal level. What do we do differently, maybe for people with pain? How do our coaches program some warm-ups? I think we both now had our coaches on the program between
That's correct.
Mr. Grayson and between Mr. Twanma. So, yeah, really nice that now we've introduced the world to the people behind our wonderful physiques and mindsets. Oh, and now we even have our coach, Clayton, who came on the program.
Mm-hmm.
So, what a wonderful world we're creating.
That's right.
We're really blending the backgrounds of our lives together. And I just love it. And I hope the people listening love it too.
Yeah, yes. So let's dive in. Why don't we start with, last episode we talked about generalities with warming up, what we do or what we think about it. Now, if somebody was injured, you're seeing them in clinic and you're helping them kind of create a warm up for their lifts or whatever it is. How would that change for you as far as the way you might kind of go about it? Are you actually putting something specific in there? This stuff needs to be done, or is it still kind of, let's just get the heart rate up, let's just get prep for the movements, let's just get the body warm, and then you get after it?
Yeah, I think it, for the most part, I'll start off with a pretty generic warm-up. And I think when we've chatted about programming in the past, or at least I hope we did, I typically have themes, like I'm sure most coaches do, for the 4 or 8 week cycle, whether that's strength or power or isometrics, you name it. So I'll start off with a pretty big skeleton, and then I'll start kind of dropping that in to mostly the people who are dealing with active injuries or active pain from an individual level. If people are really thinking about pain as a limiting factor for what they're able to do, I do encourage them to start off with a warm up of 3 to 5 minutes, whether that's on the bike, the treadmill, just something that we can tap into their heart rate a bit. Begin to release some pain relieving molecules all floating through the body. And I do encourage them to try to do that for at least 3 to 5 minutes. Now, I think most of the research would say it's probably closer to 10, but that's a delicate conversation. I know people are sort of like in a very contained space when it comes to training So I don't want their warm up to bleed into their entire workout. Although for some people, the warm up is the workout, or the warm up could be a big part of what they're going to do. And then we just sort of kind of shy that down. So from there, I'll probably have them more start with isometrics around the area that's in pain. And that's a little bit more to just to gauge what's the capacity of that tissue today. I'll give them like a ramp up idea. So start off slow. If it's 10%, start pushing there. This could be into a wall, a foam roller, maybe we work on a specific position. And then I'm going to have them gradually take that up. Most of the time, if we can get to, 50 to 70% of their, true effort, I know that's subjective. That typically will match a lot of the strength-based workouts that we're going to probably do the rest of that day. So it's sort of like a dress rehearsal. Hey, your knee can handle 50 to 75% effort. Let's try to match that now with our squats, our deadlifts, our lunges, and see how it goes. And I think that's really how I would approach most people just with pain. And there's other little nuances, but I'll stop. I'll let you share. Is there a particular warm-up for your clients that you think about when it just strictly comes to pain as a limiting factor?
Yeah, as far as where I would be with my warm-ups with people, it's kind of like, people already have a hard time fitting in some of these movements throughout the day. So I take it as a way, especially if the workout is going to be incorporating movements that might, say I think we talked a whole lot about shoulder last time. So I use shoulder again as kind of the example. If it's like an upper body movement, I'm going to have them sprinkle in some of their exercises that they have to do for their pain at the top, just to start to, if there are things that are already bringing down pain or they're working on specific qualities, especially, those things will probably end up blending into what they need to do for the lifts anyway. I think it's a good way to start to prepare them and just give them an opportunity to get some of that movement in that they are supposed to be doing anyway without having to feel like they have to create more time for it. So I think that's a great place to start to put that stuff. The rules of how you're going to warm up is going to be exactly what we talked about last episode. It's, how are we going to start to get it more specific to your particular lifts or your workout, whatever you're going to be planning on doing for that day, and just making sure that it's, going from, maybe we're going to do 1-2 movements for your shoulder, and then we're going to go into things specific to the lifts for the day, and then we're going to get a little bit more higher intense, and then we're going to get right into your stuff. So that's kind of probably the only little nuance that would probably change. Is I say we're going to put some stuff in the top that's going to be specific for some of the qualities that we're trying to improve, so that this way you have a little bit better access or awareness of those movements as you're getting into your lifts. And then we're hoping that the stuff that's already in those programs are all just going to kind of all complement each other really well to help you move better, feel better, get stronger, all those things.
Yeah, I like the idea of blending rehab into people's programs. And I always have two thoughts about this, and I typically will pose it to the client. How much time do we realistically have during the course of the week to get in the things that we quote unquote agreed to in our assessment versus how many times are you actually going to be able to go to the gym? So I think I took this from Dan, keeping the goals the goals. So why do you go to the gym? Hey, well, I'm going there to lose weight, to strength train, to, work on this. And they're usually like specific qualities. Not too many people, I think, are going to preface their why do I go to the gym with, hey, I'm trying to conquer pain, right? Or I'm trying to rehab my tendon, or I'm trying to do this, right? That's a little bit more specific. I know I don't think that way. I usually think in kind of big picture. I want to work on power and speed and strength, and that's a really big umbrella. But I think generally speaking, most people would agree with that. So when it comes to these ideas of blending the rehab with their warm-up, absolutely. If they're a little bit condensed with time, I think as a warm-up or even as a finisher, potentially even supersetting it or pairing it with some opposite features. So I'll get into that in a second. But if they're condensed for time, your rehab exercises are typically low threshold. They can go through any sort of warm-up. They can be paired with any core or maybe conditioning finisher. And if you are sticking with the shoulder as an example, so I'll stick there too, if you're doing a day where you're working on some heavy squats or heavy deadlifts, hey, when you're resting from that, why not take care of some of your rehab stuff in that superset, right? Something, again, low threshold, something that you want to work on specifically. And if people are like, hey, I have the time to do whenever, maybe I don't have kids, maybe I live alone, maybe my job is flexible, right? Whatever affordances they have, then I'll say, all right, well, we're not even going to worry about your rehab in the gym. We're just going to keep working on the things that are meaningful for you. And then your days off, your aerobic days or whatever, then that's when you can tell me, hey, I can take 10 or 15 minutes to work on those types of things separately. So I think, again, with the context of pain and rehab and working all this stuff in, it's really going to be individual. And I'm wondering, do you sort of take some flexibility with that? Or is accountability really first and foremost for you where, hey, look, if I know if I don't drop this into a workout, giving people another opportunity to do it on their own is probably going to make them a little less successful. And I've had that happen too, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a component. I had a conversation with one of my clients yesterday, and he was like, yeah, he's doing really well. He's like, I don't have any pain really. Like he's getting back into competitive running. He took some time off from it. He's getting a little burnt out from it. And, he's like, yeah, but, I just really need to get back in on the mobility stuff. And I'm like, well, what's going to be easier? Like, he's like, oh, I have like 20, 30 minutes in the mornings. It's just a matter of me doing it. I was like, do you want me to just like put more of it into your workouts and bleed them all together? Like, would that be easier for you? So we're going to kind of test both. We're going to do this block and probably next block with like the traditional way we're going. And then we might start to bleed it into some of it all being together and see what he likes more and what's easier for him. So there's definitely, an accountability purpose. I know for me personally, like having it all blended into one session makes it way easier for me to do it because life gets in the way, kids, whatever, stuck in work. And then all of a sudden I'm not doing the mobility work that I'm supposed to do, right? So I like having it all in one place from an accountability and doing it standpoint. It's there. It also makes sense for like the way I look at things when I'm programming out for somebody is whatever the movements are for the day, we'll stick with the shoulder. Let's say we have someone doing some sort of chest press, bench press, push up, whatever it is. We know what kind of movements the shoulders are going to be moving through, right? They need some extension. They need some internal rotation. There's, abduction of the shoulder, all that stuff. How can we start to prep those tissues? If you're already somebody who has issues and pain with extension, we're probably not going to be benching, but we may be doing some sort of pressing or getting it back into it. But we can start to train those individual qualities earlier in the sessions to give your shoulder better capacity to bench. But we're also training the tissues, going back to you saying isometrics. We can use isometrics as like, it's not fitness, it's not sexy, right? But it's a thing that can get you building back up to those exercises. And it may actually be like a key piece in your program to load that particular pattern so you can get back to it. All the other stuff around it may have more of a fitness component to it. But when we're talking about pain and like the warm-ups and even in the body of your sessions, we need to prep those tissues, right? So that they can become more resilient and get into those positions better so you can actually load them. And if you're just going to take them out of the program and never do those things, there's still going to be that a big gap from like what your body can do to those lifts. Like, yeah, sure, you can go lighter. That might help. But I also really like to kind of load the tissue specifically. Extension, internal rotation, how much force can we produce there? How can we challenge in different ways? And then as you start to be able to load those tissues more, now when you go to bench, everything's working better in a sense. So that's kind of the two ways I look at it. Sure, there's an accountability standpoint, but there's also like a tissue prep, tissue strengthening thing. And I think it kind of just makes sense if you're like, okay, well, these are the things that you're going to be doing in this session, and we can just break it down to parts, train those pieces. And then when you go into the full workout, everything's starting to feel a little bit better.
Yeah, I think the other context that I was going to mention with the warm-ups, obviously you have the skeleton. If your limiting factor is pain, hey, getting your heart rate up, doing some isometrics can actually maybe help you feel a little bit better, right? You're releasing your body's own analgesics or like pain relieving type modalities or activating that system. If it's a mobility thing, like you were saying, I think I am going to be a little bit more specific or forthcoming with people to say, hey, we found a specific limitation in your ability to make a shape, right? And we'll stick with the bench press like you were mentioning before. But your arm just doesn't go down into that extension and maybe that internal rotation position. So we need to work on that space or that range. Now, if it's something that's fast responding, you might be able to do a foam roll, a stretch, a little quick mobility drill, and that arm really opens up. And in that case, I'm going to basically just use then the primary mode of the load, like the bench, as the dress rehearsal for specific tissue loading. And I think this is probably where I've deviated a little bit over the course of time, where I think most of the stuff around that pain or maybe protection for most people, not everyone, is like more nervous system. So if we can create some more range for you at the shoulder, so you can better make a shape of the bench press, and we're thinking that time is a factor, well, we probably work through what you can tolerate on the bench. Let's just say it's a 100-pound bench press, right? We'll keep the math super simple. Once you create a little bit of that range of motion or that mobility, then for me, that tissue prep is just going to be, let's cut your workload in half. Let's go 50%, so 50 pounds. Let's start actually getting you to audition, right? Teach your nervous system, hey, this is a threat, this is a load to my shoulder, but I can manage this. You're successful with 50% of that weight, so then we go up to 75% of that weight. We get a dress rehearsal again. And then, depending on how you're feeling, maybe you do a heavier set, like close to your weight that you're working on. Maybe you do a 90-pound rep or a 95-pound rep. And then each time it just serves as specific input to the thing that we want to work on. It may be cut down a little bit more time because now you're not doing as many things prior to your workout. And then I think, again, that like really big rehearsal for your body to say, hey, I could do this. Hey, I could do this. Hey, I could do this. Like that, I think is really empowering for a lot of clients. So pain wise, hey, go do your quick warm up, hit some isometrics, show yourself what you can handle. But mobility things, yeah, I definitely agree with you. I want to kind of dive into that a little bit more. Or if they can't make that shape, hey, we still want to work on this. Obviously, we're going to have our check-ins, but we're not going to do that barbell bench press today. We're going to do it on cables. We're going to do it on an incline. We're going to do some sort of modification. And then in that case, there's nothing to audition. I know you can't make the shape, so why even waste time? We'll come back and we'll check on that in a few weeks. And then when you can, then that's when we can start that kind of process.
I like that. The thought process a lot. And I think this is kind of like a perfect place to kind of segue into like kind of how our warm-ups are shaped and things like that. Because, kind of what I described a little bit is, Grayson uses the internal strength model from FRC, functional range conditioning stuff and all that. So the way that like his programs are kind of aligned is, it's all like mobility stuff at the top. It's all isometric, heavy isometrics, heavy eccentrics, and it's always rotational stuff first. Then, if we're looking at the shoulder, internal, external rotation work, depending, and it's all based on whatever the lifts are. So, like if we're talking about bench again, it would be a heavy internal rotation focus. And then it would kind of bleed into whatever. And then if it's like overhead portion of things, it would probably be like internal rotation, then flexion, by like kind of prepping those tissues in a sense. But it's I know a bunch of times you've been talking about it, and it's actually interesting, and it's almost shifted a little bit of the way that I think about things, because in the past I would do kind of what you've mentioned on this podcast before, is if you're ramping up and like it's bench press, like your mobility work and stuff like that is going to be lower body, right? Because you don't want it to be competing. What I've actually found is doing heavy stuff for my shoulders. When I get to my lifts, I actually feel more prepared in a sense. So it's actually been a little bit of a nice thing. And I just, it kind of all makes sense to me. Like tissue is tissue, right? You can stress it in any way, shape, or form. Your body's going to adapt to it. So that's been an interesting shift. But that's kind of like my warm-ups really is just kind of like all of the tissue prep stuff that they plan in there. So it's pretty heavy mobility work. Then I get into the meat and potatoes of the movements. And that seems to be working pretty well for me right now. And overall, my body's been responding pretty well from it from a pain perspective. I don't know if you have any questions on that, or you want to share what you and Ross go through.
Yeah, no, I think ultimately from N equals 1, right? What do I do? What do you do? As long as we're working towards our goals and seeing results, there is nothing better, right? There's just different. So I think it keeps this idea open that there's a lot of opportunity for flexibility and not trying to fit our patients who might be square pegs into a round hole of like some sort of like specific warm up. So I think the reason why I've always liked training with Ross is we have a lot of similar biases when it comes to things. And, when we go out and share ideas, we share a lot of similar thoughts about frustration and growth and change and all this other stuff. So from a big picture standpoint, I think Ross knowing me so well gives me a little bit of flexibility with the warm up. So there's nothing programmed per se, but him and I have had conversations where I kind of tell him what I go through. So for me, most of the time, I think time of day is a big factor for me on what I do as a warm up. So if it's morning or I'm working out here, which is, typically I wake up anywhere, around 6 or 6:30 and I'll work out in the living room and blah, blah, blah. But I know at that point, I'm a little bit cooler and a little bit stiffer than I would be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon after taking, 8,000 steps, working, doing things around the house, whatever the case may be. So time of the day is a factor for me. I will then, let's say, look at what he has set up for me. And typically, if it is a bench press, again, we'll just stick with that theme. I agree with you. Like doing some high threshold nervous system things always makes me feel a little bit more prepared. And the way that I've just sort of played with it was, well, all right, I do some warm ups and swings and stuff for my arms. And then I'll go to like more lower body power output. And I found that it has that same sort of effect. So I'll do squat jumps or I'll do broad jumps, just something where it's like, hey, okay, cool. Let me just give out that force, not fatigue my upper body, and see how that goes. And I think I remember reading that from what Charlie Francis used to do. He was the track coach for the USA, I think, track team. What he would do with, let's say, I think it was, not Michael Johnson. Is it Michael Johnson? I feel like I'm trying to remember from like the early 90s or 80s. Anyway, with a lot of the track athletes, if he knew that they were coming up to a competition, he'd have them do like a heavy bench press, like a day or two before, like max out, get that nervous system primed. And then, they go run their 100 meters. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, I'm going to compare myself to Olympic athletes because why not, And I've sort of felt like with just some of the generic warm-ups, hitting cars, which we've talked about, which are controlled rotations through that FR system. For me, I know my shoulders are going to take load. I want to know how they're feeling. So few cars, hey, they feel pretty good. Awesome. Now I'm going to jump right into maybe some lower body, output type things, broad jumps, squat jumps. And then I'm going to probably just bleed right into my workout, doing that like 50, 75%, 100 rule. And then, I'm rolling, I'm off, I'm ready to rock. I think that, again, sometimes I'll cut that much shorter at 3 p.m. or 2 p.m. and I'm feeling good. And maybe I just worked with a client doing some hip mobility or going over some jumping or going over I'm playing med ball catch with them. So if I have that might be my warm up, just kind of working with a client. And then I just sort of roll into my 50, 75%, 100 working set. So I think that's my little nuance with myself. Kind of just gauging how I feel, gauging time of the day. So far, at least one of the trainers came up to me the other day, was like, hey, Joe, are you working, you dealing with anything right now? Because he's had a couple of knee issues, a couple of shoulder issues. And I was like, you know what? I actually got to say, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm not dealing with anything I am concerned about putting under load or with running or anything like that. And I think I felt that way for quite a while. So I've been very fortunate. Now, next week when I come on the podcast, you'll probably see me leaning this way because, my back will be out or something like that.
Yeah. You got to knock on wood or something, Joe.
I know. Yeah. Well, I got this table that I'm going to throw away, so I'll just do that. But that's what's worked for me. And again, like watching you train and just thinking about my own personal like progressions with things, again, I've been very happy to the point where I'm like, okay, well, what now? Do I need to bench press more? Sure. Yeah. If it happens. Do I need to squat more? Yeah, sure. If it happens. But, where I am, I'm just like, cool. I didn't think I'd be here to begin with. So let's just keep this consistency train rolling and, let a pound or 2 or 5 come as it may. But now it allows me to focus on some other things like nutrition, which maybe we'll talk about. I don't think we have talked about that.
Yeah, that'll be good. Yeah. episode 44 or 45 can flow down that rabbit hole. But I really like that. I think, obviously, here on this podcast, we have not necessarily differing ideas, but we do things differently as far as our warm-ups go, and how even just talking about when someone is injured, right? There's some nuances and difference in how we kind of go about it. And I think as a listener, really just kind of, your warm-ups, they're flexible. They don't need to be super rigid. They definitely shouldn't be taking you forever. So if you're going 35, 40 minutes, you probably need to figure out how can you condense that, because you definitely don't need that much time. I know I've been there before in the past, and now I can probably get into something with no warm-up and be okay. So just, again, back to that point. But I think flexibility, I think, is also a really good place for people to, and you can bring back cool downs from last time, something after your session, that if you are dealing with something that's nagging, it's just such an easy place to add some movement because you're already doing it, and you're finding that you're having a hard time fitting it in. It's a really easy place to just get in a few pieces of movement.
Yeah, perfect.
Anything else you got, Joey boy? Or are you going to take us home?
I think we covered it. So, Joe, I love you. Thank you for your time. Listeners, we love you. Thank you for your time as well. Oh, yeah, what was this? The heart thing, right?
That's the heart thing, yeah.
Dang.
Olivia's got it as a pro at this. You have to watch YouTube to see the little heart, the Korean heart that we got going on here.
Well, if that doesn't make you want to sign up for YouTube, nothing will. And please come back next week for another exciting episode of the Beyond Pain.
You might have to cut off this end, Joe.
That's okay.